Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to this program on Madagascar, which is a country in Africa. My name is Barry Pell, world traveler, photojournalist. It's great to see you all here this afternoon. Madagascar is indeed one of the poorest countries in the world, but it is exceedingly rich in its people, the culture, and especially the animals and the landscape. I will take you on a tour of this place vicariously based on my travels around the entire island a couple of years ago. Madagascar is the world's fourth largest island. It previously was a French colony. It's been independent since 1960. And it is on many travelers' must-see list. I'm not sure how many of you have been there or interested to be there, to go there, but it indeed does have, for Africa, a very unique people, much different than other people on the continent, also a unique culture, and particularly a unique species of primate. Does anybody know the name of that primate? Yes. The lemur, yes, exactly. Of course, many people became curious about Madagascar for the first time having watched, the media can be so uninformative. They watched the 2005 animated DreamWorks film, which was about a friendship between the lemurs with penguins that escaped from New York Central Park Zoo. Well, not to leave any misunderstanding, there are no penguins or zebras, or giraffes, or lions in Madagascar. So I traveled there with my wife a couple of years back. I visited the capital, which I'll be showing you, also the smaller towns and many of the national parks. Now, most people, when they go to see visitors from abroad who go to visit Madagascar, they'll typically hire an SUV and they'll go as a couple or maybe 4 or 6 people, and they'll have an escorted trip around the island to some of the major sites. But for any of you who know my method of travel, I did not travel that way. Only a select handful of people travel the way I did, which was on public transportation, going on the local buses, which they have, the vans, sometimes mingling in with the goats and chickens, and really getting a firsthand encounter with the life and culture of the island's people, and sometimes in a very bumpy ride. And in that way, I traveled some 1,500 miles on this local public transportation. Often, I was a few years younger, I often was squeezed into buses and vans, and I also did some hitchhiking, which I love to do, on the beds of pickup trucks and delivery vans and anyone who stopped to pick us up. As I say, it was a great way to meet and get to know the Malagasy people. So you all have a map. The map indicates on the top where Madagascar is relative to Africa. It is an island that is southeast of the continent. And on the bottom, you have an expansion of that island. The capital is shown in the center. It's Antananarivo, which nobody ever says. They just say, I'm going to Tana, T-A-N-A, as the capital. There are about a handful of towns and cities that have about 100,000 people. It has a very fast-growing population, but it's not one of the top populated countries of the African continent. Okay, so Madagascar then is an island located in the center in the Indian Ocean, the south part of the Indian Ocean, east of the coast of southern Africa, just north of the Tropic of Capricorn. It is, as I mentioned, the world's 4th largest island. See how good you are with your geography. The other 3 islands that are bigger than Madagascar are, first off, Greenland, then Papua New Guinea, and then Borneo. What's that? Not larger islands that are uninhabited. Like what? Is larger than Madagascar? I don't really. I haven't. No, I haven't heard. Haven't heard that. Okay, I'll check it. So the island, as you could see from this map, the island actually, if you take the west side of Madagascar, it will fit snugly right into the indentation of the African mainland. And indeed, that's not a coincidence, because in fact, at one time, it was part of the African continent, and it broke off quite a while ago. Yes, sir, we're going to talk about that. So it broke off some 165 million years ago. Its resulting isolation from the mainland, which is about 250 to 300 miles, depending on where you measure it from, then this isolation over time and evolution produced a very unique environment, which spawned an explosion of plants and animals that are found, well, nowhere else on the planet. Well, Madagascar, consequently, is one of the most important countries for biodiversity on Earth. And if you look at some of the statistics, you'll quickly gather that the country's natural history is amazing. There are over 200,000 species on the island that live in a range of different habitats. For a small place, this island has many different climate zones and topographies and habitats, which range from rainforests in the east to deserts on the west, and from mountaintops, mostly in the center of the island, to mangrove swamps. And they are as unique as they are diverse. There are 6 whole plant families that exist only on Madagascar. There are over 4,200 tree species, thousands of succulents that can retain water in dry climates, like the baobab tree. There are also countless insects, including this stick insect that you see here that camouflages itself very well on tree branches. Here is its head up here and some of its arms. You can hardly make it out on the when it's nestled within the limbs of a bush or a tree. There are 300 species of frog and 270 kinds of reptiles, including this one, the radiated tortoise. There are over 200 breeding species of birds and more than 100 different mammals. It is quite a menagerie. But Madagascar's best-known mammals are, as someone recognized, the lemurs. And of the lemurs, there are nearly 110 species on Madagascar in 5 different family groupings. Now, lemurs belong to a group of primates, which are called prosimians, which is a word that means before monkeys. The basic body shape of these lemurs evolved some 40 to 50 million years ago, and at that time, they were the latest model of primate. They had better depth and color perception, they had hands that were able to grip branches, a more developed brain, extended parental care, and a complex social system that incorporates a wide range of sound and scent signals to communicate with each other. And so at that time, 40 to 50 million years ago, they replaced anything else that came before. They were the latest model in the evolution of tree-living mammals. Their reign, though, only lasted, from an evolutionary standpoint, not that long, about 10 million years. And then there was a new model, and that new model was the monkey. Monkeys were superior to lemurs in many ways. They were faster, they could think more quickly, they could use their vision more effectively, and they were also more dexterous. And so monkeys quickly replaced lemurs, which were then destined for fossil records. They vanished, the lemurs did, from all the forests of the world. That is, everywhere but on the island of Madagascar, where they continued. Why? A very simple reason. There were no monkeys that made it to Madagascar. They didn't have competition. Well, I will return to a discussion of Madagascar's unique natural world in a while, and in fact, the reason that most visitors come to the island. But first, and certainly as much interest to me as the animals were, I would like to tell you something about the country's, I believe, equally special human inhabitants, something about their history, their daily lives, their work, their culture, their pastimes, like this boy on his homemade stilts, and especially their very intricate customs that entail a complex web of beliefs and taboos that bind the people powerfully to the natural world and especially to the ancestors who they venerate. Well, the first humans on Madagascar have a much different arrival pattern and therefore a much different look than the Bantu black Africans on the mainland. They arrived just about 2,000 years ago, and they came, perhaps surprisingly, they came from the distant shores of Indonesia and Malaysia in Southeast Asia. Now, how these first Asian settlers reached Madagascar is still a mystery. But artifacts of Indonesian-style sailing boats found along the northern shores of the Indian Ocean, perhaps resembling these modern-day dhows, as they're called, from Kenya, suggest that the Asians, and especially the Indonesians, may have migrated in a single voyage as they stopped en route at various points, and they didn't come across the open sea, but they went along the coastline, hugging the shores of India, Arabia, and then working their way down the coast of East Africa. And when these settlers came, they brought with them essentially the lifestyle and the food crops of Southeast Asia. And even today, as we look at these terraced rice fields, these fields that they cultivate, the principal crop of rice, resemble the landscape of Southeast Asia much more than the crops and landscape of the African mainland. That the descendants of these first settlers were also much lighter skinned, similar to Southeast Asians. They were not, as I say, the black Bantu tribes of Central African mainland. These were the lighter skinned Merina tribe, and that tribe, among others, became the most powerful group on the island. Now, it was Marco Polo who was the first European to discover the island, and he reported the existence of what he called, quote, a great red island because of the color of the soil. Marco Polo gave it the name Madagascar. In the centuries that followed, then Europeans arrived. They arrived to trade with these local tribes. By the 18th century, the dominant Merina tribe had unified the island and they ruled it. And they began a series of king and queen rulers. And they built lavish mansions to house their royalty. This is the remains of one of them. The British and French also showed up to compete for trade commercial interest with the islanders and those kingdoms. By the late 1800s, though, the British had sort of left the scene, leaving France as the major power, and Madagascar became a French colony. The monarchy of the indigenous group, who had come actually from Indonesia, was abolished. Well, similar to other European colonies on the African mainland, there was pressure for independence by these people, not to be part of France anymore. And a Malagasy, as it's referred to, a Malagasy independence movement began to flourish in the early part of the 20th century. And Madagascar had a very favorable history in that rather than having a lot of bloodshed to achieve independence, there was a peaceful transition from France to a fully independent nation by the year 1960. But French culture, even today, is still evident. It remains strong in some aspects. In architecture, like these decorated houses and commercial establishments, in French fashion that you can still find, in food, which I was glad to see, including delicious baguettes at French patisseries, fresh morning croissants, and these local lobsters. There are pastimes such as the French game of boules, which have been adopted by many of the Malagasy people. There are the ubiquitous Citroën Renault automobiles that still buzz along the streets. And these cars are so popular that they've been miniaturized as children's toys and tourist souvenirs. And of course, perhaps underlying all of this, despite the fact that there is a Malagasy language, French is also widely spoken. And there are many French people who still make Madagascar their home. But as I say, there is a local language called Malagasy, which also, not surprisingly, has an Indonesian origin, but it also includes a lot of African influences, especially Swahili influences from further north in the Arabic-speaking parts of East Africa. This is referred to as Swahili, many Arabic settlers there. Here, some teenagers are checking the advertisements for the latest movie imports. And you also see a mix of French and Malagasy, such as on these restroom signs in both languages. Now, Malagasy is a very rich language. It is full of images and metaphors and proverbs. So let me give you an example. In Malagasy, there is a word called miala, which means to go out or go away. And there's another word named mandri, which means to lie down or go to sleep. But when you combine these two words, they mean together to spend the night away from home and yet be back in the early morning as if never having been away. So it conjures all sorts of imagery. And Malagasy and French are still both official languages. Now, during World War II, Madagascar, if you know your history, Madagascar was ruled, well, France was ruled during the colonization period in World War II. France was ruled by the pro-Nazi Vichy government, and therefore so was Madagascar. And it's an historical note that immediately prior to and in the early years of the war, the German Nazis, as well as many anti-Semites across Europe, proposed what has come to be known as the Madagascar Plan. And that would have involved the wholesale deportation of European Jews to the island instead of extermination. Essentially, Madagascar would have been a vast reservation for as many as 3 million Jews. And well into 1941, the Madagascar Plan was Germany's stated final solution. It was only when such a policy became impractical, largely because of the British Navy's control of the seas to preclude such transport, that the Nazis turned from exportation to extermination, and of course, a much more terrible final solution. So the people of Madagascar, as well as their language, are referred to as Malagasy, and you can see in appearance they do look much different than mainland Africans, and they see themselves as different. They actually see themselves as superior to Africans on the mainland. They have very strong pride, which is on the rise today, and it is accompanied not only by a kind of a bit of pride and arrogance about their unique stature, but also a desire to break free, at least culturally, from the influence of France and to restore Malagasy language and traditions. So the people themselves, I mentioned the first and dominant tribe was the Merina tribe, but actually there are 18 different tribes depicted on this stone tablet of much smaller size. And the boundaries of these tribes are based on the old kingdoms that had been established before French colonization. And the Merina, as I say, are the largest group. They account for over a quarter of the population, but ethnic differences among these tribal designations are somewhat fluid. And I must say, I did not observe any of the ethnic rivalry or tensions that I had in other countries of Africa that have a multitude of different tribes and have tended to destabilize those countries. Madagascar has not suffered that fate. There are distinctive differences in appearance. For example, the men of the Betsilio tribe, which is located in the country's south, on the high plateau, are noted for their colorful blankets worn around their shoulders. And they're the only tribe who routinely do that. And you can identify them by those coverings. Now, overall, in Malagasy society, politeness is very important. Impatience or pushy behavior is regarded as shocking. Malagasy society is a very structured hierarchy with two fundamental rules. One is respect for the other person, and the other is knowing one's place. The welcoming of strangers, traditions of hospitality are sacred throughout this country, which I was very happy to receive. Well, Malagasy society is also fairly liberated. Marriage is a pretty relaxed institution. Divorce is common. Women are generally considered the most dynamic force in their society. Wives are regarded as the domestic head. Children are seen as the primary purpose of marriage. The very thought that some people might choose not to have children is greeted with embarrassed disbelief. But consequently, the island's average population growth ranks among the highest in Africa, some 2.5% annually, and the resulting exploding population exacerbates its economic distress, and in the more remote towns and villages, we witnessed extreme poverty, young children working to sell produce rather than attending school, children saddled with the responsibility to take care of their baby siblings, and a lot of life, especially in the smaller villages, are in homes like this with unimproved conditions, without running water or sanitary facilities. So the family is certainly the central tenet of Malagasy life, and that includes not only distant cousins, but as importantly, departed ancestors, those who have already passed away. And so burial and exhumation and a second burial in their culture are the focus of Malagasy beliefs and culture. Even modern, urban Malagasy regard those who were no longer alive as yet full members of the family. And we were fortunate to attend one of these second burial ceremonies. It's called a famadine in the Malagasy language. That translates to mean the turning of the bones. And in this celebration, it is actually starts out as a very joyous occasion because people are going to be reunited with their ancestors. It occurs from 4 to 7 years after the first burial. It provides an opportunity to reestablish communication and remember a loved one, and to introduce their ancestors to new family members who've been born since the first death. How this works is that the remains of the selected relatives are gently carried from the tomb one by one. They are rewrapped in pristine white burial scarves. They're sprayed with perfume and meticulously labeled by name with marker pens, because otherwise they all look about the same. And then a quiet period follows. Family members will either stand or sit and hold the bodies in their laps and recite to them aloud everything that's happened since they died. Fill them in, if you will, on what was been going on in their village, what new births occurred. They are placed on straw mats on the ground, and the mats are sort of to the side of all the congregants, who then participate in a grand celebration, because this is a happy time. This celebration can last up to a week. It involves the family and friends in considerable expense. The celebrants are not supposed to show any grief at this time. There are generous quantities of homemade rum that are consumed amid a very festive atmosphere of dancing and music. Well, at the conclusion of the Famadine festivities, the remains are lovingly then carried once more around the tomb before being replaced. And at that time, it's almost like a mask has dropped in front of their faces, which have gone from extremely joyous and smiling and laughing to quite somber. The air is charged with emotion. Grieving adults and curious children look on, and the huge stone entrance is then replaced back in front of the entrance to the crypt. Family members are now parted from their relatives for another 4 to 7 years. Well, I must say this ceremony is clearly in great contrast to Western culture and may seem at first strange, but I think it was for us an opportunity to examine our own beliefs and rituals associated with death. Well, Malagasy society also conforms. I mentioned there are a lot of rules. It's very hierarchical. There are a set of rules in daily living which are known as fadi, which loosely translates as taboo. And these beliefs are related to actions or food or even days of the week when it might be dangerous to do something. So these rules vary by tribe, by community to community, even from family to family. So for example, within the Marina tribe, it's fadi, taboo, to hold a funeral on a Tuesday, or it's believed there will be another death. Among the Anjurora tribe, it's fadi to ask for salt directly. So one has to, when asking for salt at the table, ask for the thing that flavors the food. Never say salt. Now, some of these are a bit inexplicable to the uninitiated, but one that is more understandable is a fadi connected with objects is that the spade used to dig a grave should not have too firm should have a loose handle, because it's dangerous to have too firm a connection between the living and the dead. Now, these fadis are not necessarily intended to restrict freedom, but to ensure happiness and an improved quality of life. And many fadi actually benefit conservation and the environment in the country. For instance, some fadi have to do with prohibition of killing certain animals. And there are also sacred forest areas where it's strictly prohibited to cut trees or even to burn deadwood or leaf litter. Now, a near sacred animal in Malagasy society, in which today number about 6 million, is a humpbacked ox named the zebu. Now, zebu are very important in Malagasy society. They're a symbol of wealth and status. They are the most commonly eaten meat in the country. Zebu milk is also an important part of their diet by some of the tribes. It is fadi, or taboo, for women to milk the cows, but it is they who sell the curdled milk in the market. There are indeed, because of the presence of these animals and the importance of them, there are 80 different words in their language to describe zebu, their physical aspects, in particular their color, their horns, and their large wobbling humps on their back. The hump reportedly is the best piece of meat in the world, with a taste similar to caviar. Well, we observed large herds of these zebu being inspected and bought and sold in enormous weekly markets throughout the country, by herdsmen who may have brought their animals more than 100 miles to the markets. Zebu are usually yoked in pairs into wooden-wheeled carts for transport, and cattle rustling, these are very valuable animals, cattle rustling is a major problem, and according to tradition, a young man from the Bara tribe must prove himself for marriage by stealing a zebu. To the rural Malagasy, a herd of zebu is clearly as symbolic of prosperity as a new car or a large house would be in our culture. So Madagascar's population is some 31 million, and the capital, which is centrally located in the country, is called Antananarivo, which, as I say, nobody ever would say. You'd mark yourself as a real newcomer. If you did, everybody says Tana. Contains about 1.25 million people. And it is filled, as many African cities are, with open-air market stands, produce being carried to market by young children. And also, distinctively, it is located in the plateau in the central highlands of Madagascar. And the town has an upper and a lower part, which is exhausting to visit. You can see here one of those sets of stairways. We always try to end our day with a downhill walk rather than an uphill one. And that's the capital. But really more impressive than that is the landscape of the countryside, which is amazingly diverse. And indeed, as I suggested in the introduction, there are 3 climate zones and topographic zones that basically create slices of the country in a north to south direction. And each one contains unique species of plants and animals. So we'll start with the west side. The west side of the country on the African continent, mainland side, is characterized by a dry desert. The most distinctive element in that dry landscape is the African baobab tree. Baobab tree is a very, very African tree found throughout Africa, but the baobab species are especially found here in this dry area. Baobabs, of course, are able to survive because they can take up and store water within their soft, porous, bulbous trunk and therefore survive the dry season. There are 6 different species of baobabs that are found in Madagascar, including this bottle-shaped tree. And to the Malagasy, very sacred tree, the baobab, one of whose species means mother of the forest. They are important, certainly important economically. They yield highly nutritious fruit. Oil is extracted for cooking from the seeds. Strong fiber is made from the bark for roofing, for rope or roofing material. And they also have a spiritual significance. They provide a home for some of the spirits of ancestors in some tribes. Also found in dry areas in this zone at ground level is a short, fat Pacopodia, as it's called, which translates to mean elephant's foot. And it does look a little bit like a miniature baobab tree. And then we go to the slice, the second slice, which is in the center of the island. It is a high plateau. There are volcanic peaks that rise to some 8,500 feet. It's quite beautiful. There are steep sandstone massifs that have been subsequently eroded over millions of years by wind and water to some rather exotic shapes. Some of them have been named, like this one, for its resemblance to a tortoise. And they create some very dramatic vistas, like this sort of Grand Canyon of Madagascar. And there are golden grassland plains at the bottom that are punctuated by great craggy pinnacles of terracotta rock. And there are also, in between these mountains, there are valleys and waterfalls and natural pools. There also, because of this very moist environment, there's a lot of lichen that grows on the weathered rock, which adds quite a colorful palette, like so. Now, near streams and in the lush pockets of the rainforest, in the deeper canyons in the central area, are ferns and palm trees. And Madagascar is indeed home to one of the world's richest palm floras. There are about 170 species, 3 times more than the rest of Africa combined. Nearly all of them are not found anywhere else on Earth. One palm has actually led to a Malagasy word entering the English language, and that is the Malagasy word raffia, or raffia palm. The fibers of this palm are woven into hats and baskets and mats. And of the tree species, we have this so-called traveler's tree, one of the country's most elegant, symmetrical trees, and it earns its name, the traveler's tree, because water is stored quite fully in the base of its fronds and can be released. When a thirsty traveler is wandering through the forest and encounters one of these trees, they can use a machete to break off the bottom and hold it up to your mouth, and fresh, drinkable, potable water will come streaming out of the bottom. Now, Madagascar has one of the richest floras in the world. The upper estimate of its, of its diversity is some 12,000 species, and that makes the island the world's #1 floral hotspot for an area of its size. And 80% of the island's plant species are not found anywhere else. There are indeed 1,000 species of orchids found in Madagascar, more than in all of mainland Africa, and located in all 3 of the habitats. I haven't spoken about the last one yet, but which is the wetlands of the east, but the different species of orchids are found from the dry forest to the cool mountain highland ranges and the wet forests on the east. Equally abundant in the eastern rainforests are fern forests with their large spreading fronds sprouting from a tall, scaly stem. And there's a unique plant that grows there. There are some 60 species of this plant. It's very beautiful. It's called a pitcher plant. It's found mostly in the swampy areas of the rainforest, and it is a carnivorous plant because this plant, quite beautiful to behold, produces a nectar, and that nectar attracts insects who then go into the pitcher part, the cup part of the plant, which has along its interior skin some downward pointing hairs. And so these hairs facilitate the insect to go down, but never to leave. The plant then, having captured the insect, dissolves its prey. Interestingly, similar species to these pitcher plants have been found in Southeast Asia, which lends credence to the theory of migration of these people from Southeast Asia to Madagascar. It's thought that the migration may have been along the same path, maybe sharing even the same boats as the early human settlers on the island. Now, the island's flowers are used in a cottage industry. They're cut and used in the fabrication of decorative paper. And when the paper pulp is spread in a wooden frame in the sunlight and nearly dry, fresh flowers are then pressed into it, and after final drying, they are cut into stationery, cards, and envelopes with these fresh flora. So we have the dry zone, we have the midland high plateau zone. The third ecosystem is on the east side of the country, and it is a lowland rainforest. There are mangrove swamps and long, sweeping, sandy beaches. The island's few resorts, if you will, are found in this area. And fishing is the main occupation along much of the east coast. Although this area, which is exposed to the open Indian Ocean, is quite turbulent, and that makes fishing here in these small dugout pirogues very treacherous. This coast, the East Coast, has a number of names. It's also known as the Vanilla Coast because the area produces Madagascar's world-famous vanilla plants, which have indeed been the major source of foreign currency and bolsters the economy of the country. Together with some nearby islands in the Indian Ocean, Madagascar produces some 80% of the world's supply of vanilla. And here, vanilla beans are being separated into their two grades based on the amount of moisture that they contain. Now, in the West, of course, when we think of vanilla, we usually think of it as a sweetener in desserts, pastries, but sometimes maybe as a flavor in coffee or tea. But in Madagascar, vanilla has broadened its application. It's used in a lot of savory dishes to add a subtle flavor to dishes involving chicken or duck, rice, and other main dishes. So the east side of Madagascar is also known as the Pirate Coast because it was a very popular place as a hideout for 17th and 18th century pirates, the English, Portuguese, French, and Americans, who plundered the silk-laden ships that passed en route to India. And more ominously, it is known as the Cyclone Coast. From time to time, you read about these horribly destructive cyclones that whip up in the Indian Ocean and attack the east side of the island. Severe storms have created havoc in some of the towns along the east coast, especially the town of Tomatov, which is the main town of eastern Madagascar. This town doesn't have any drainage system, and so when these storms dump feet of water on the town, people have to get around by canoe within the streets of the town itself. And speaking of getting around, similar to other countries on the African mainland, long-distance travel between towns, from town to town, is by a vehicle called, from the French, a taxi brousse, literally meaning bush taxi. These are typically 15-seat minibuses in varying states of dilapidation. This one happens to be one of the better ones. They leave from the often frenetic town bus station, unpaved, often muddy, when full. But then, of course, they pick up additional passengers along the way. There is a driver and a driver's assistant. The assistant is in charge of arranging the passengers, and I found that they had an uncanny knack for spatial relations. They were able to reassign and rearrange seating along the way. Despite the massive protestations of other passengers, they would never leave a single person waiting on the side of the road. As long as one person was there ready to pay for a ride, space was found. I counted 32 passengers, some of whom I acknowledge were children, so they were smaller, on one of our rides, thankfully only a few hours in length, in a vehicle, as I say, made for 15. Since long-distance travelers also are often going to market or maybe visiting families for a while, I'm often asked when I travel in Africa why I'm traveling in Africa, given some of the challenges and hardships where people in Africa would only get in one of these vehicles for a major family occurrence or for a living because of a job to trade. I said, I'm just going for fun. This was completely bewildering. It was like I was from a different planet, and perhaps that's true. They are carrying much of their belongings for sale, such as this man's ducks. They are substantial, strapped down to the top of the vehicle, piled high atop it, which of course means the center of gravity is very high and going around curves very fast, a little bit tricky. The possessions are strapped down very tightly, including the occasional not very happy turkey who is located up here, or even the occasional goat whose head you can see under some of these luggage pieces over here. Okay. Now, within towns themselves, local transportation is provided by brightly colored rickshaws, non-motorized generally. They're called pousse-pousse, which means, from the French, push-push. Supposedly, they were named when drivers yelled at passers-by for aid as they were having trouble pushing the vehicles up a steep hill. Some of the rickshaws are bicycle-driven. Most are pulled by running drivers, barefoot drivers, and they are used for carrying passengers as well as being the local moving van. Now, many foreigners, of course, have scruples about using these rickshaws, perceiving perhaps an association with slave labor, or finding the prospect of being pulled around by another, usually barefoot human being as rather offensive. Well, this sympathy usually wanes after a few days of relentless hounding by the pousse-pousse drivers. They seem to regard the sight of a visitor on foot as a personal insult. And in pursuit of their goal, they hound pedestrians relentlessly with whistles, hisses, and cries of pousse, pousse. When it rains, the price doubles, and a sheet of plastic is pulled over the seating area as a makeshift hood. Obviously, you always negotiate the price before getting on. In the town of Tamatave on the East Coast, where daily rains turned streets into lakes, the pousse-pousse vehicles were very useful to avoid wading through 6-inch deep water. In the southeast of the country is Madagascar's only functioning passenger train service. It takes all day to make a very appealing, if you're a train buff, 100-mile run from the central plateau, which is at an elevation of 3,300 feet, down to sea level. It passes through some of the island's most stunning rainforest scenery, crossing 57 bridges, going through 48 tunnels. The line was actually built by the French during their colonial period in the 1930s, and in part they used the metal for this line from the spoils that it gained when Germany lost World War I. Well, for many of the villages where the train stops, there is no road access, so coming or going by train is their only opportunity to get a look at the outside world and an opportunity to make some money and to offer goods for sale to passengers. Each town, each village we stopped at seemed to specialize in some other crop, and as you can see in this picture, in this village, bananas were the principal crop. But aside from the fascinating history and culture of the people in this unique corner of the world, the reason that most visitors come here is to observe its incredible array of wildlife, especially animals like the chameleon reptiles and, of course, the adorably cute lemurs. Unfortunately and tragically, drastic elimination of their forest habitat, which is used by both of these creatures, especially during the past couple of hundred years, has resulted in almost 24 species of lemurs, as well as tortoises and hippopotamus and some giant aardvarks, as well as some species of eagle. All these animals have become extinct in Madagascar. In fact, Madagascar has over 100 endangered species of mammal, the second highest number in the world after Indonesia. So when people first settled on the island, the culture they brought with them depended on two things: rice cultivation and zebu cattle. Now, both of these require open land. Madagascar had at that time a lot of forest. Rice cultivation is still the staple diet. Zebu is the spiritual staple and a link with the ancestors. And so these two aspects of their survival cannot exist in dense forests. So trees were felled on a massive scale. The undergrowth was burned. 200 years ago, the kings of Madagascar attempted unsuccessfully to halt this devastation. The first legal efforts to protect the forest came back in the 1920s when 10 reserves were set aside to keep the forests by the French government. After independence in 1960, Madagascar's population since then has more than doubled. More than 80% of the country's original forest cover has now been lost. Madagascar has therefore suffered environmental degradation, vast, over a significant part of its land. Destruction is not only by the timber companies cutting down the forest, but by impoverished peasants who clear their land for agriculture by a traditional method called tavi, which means slash and burn. And also they cut many of the trees for fuel or to make charcoal. The pressure on the forests, again, is great because much of the country is sterile grassland, and unlike on the African mainland, the savanna is lifeless because the Malagasy animals evolved to live in the forests, and they're not adapted to the new grassland environment. So finally, in 1985, an environmental movement in the country began in earnest. By 1989, the country had the world's first countrywide environmental action plan, and that offered a blueprint for biodiversity action. As part of this plan, a national park system was created, and today there are over 25 national parks and special reserves. The president committed in 2003 to triple the size of protected areas from what was then 3% of the country's total area to 10%. That number has been achieved. It's now, I understand, about 12%. Well, from the very beginning of the country's environmental movement, the needs of the people living in and around the parks was also incorporated into the park management plan. So 50% of park admission fees from tourists are returned to villagers who live around the parks. The money is used to build wells for their villages, to buy vegetable seeds, to help with tree nurseries, to build schools, and build dams to facilitate irrigation of rice fields, in order to replace some of the slash and burn agriculture. So the national parks then, when you go to Madagascar, they offer the best opportunity to view the animals in their natural environment. There are nearly 350 reptile species on Madagascar, including most of the world's chameleons. Well, it's a common misconception that chameleons change color to camouflage themselves against a background. In fact, chameleons mostly change color to regulate their temperature or to express how they're feeling. An anxious chameleon will darken and grow stripes. An angry chameleon, faced with a territorial intruder, will change colors dramatically, and their natural relaxed color, like this one, is green. Chameleons also use their body shape more than color to deter enemies. A chameleon's first reaction to being spotted on a tree or a branch by a predator is to flatten its body so that it is barely visible. Chameleons also have strong feet to grip branches, and they use their long tails as a tool for climbing and for balance. At night, when they settle down to sleep, the tail often curls up into a perfect spiral. Chameleons are indeed one of the world's slowest moving lizards. The slowness, of course, allows them to avoid predators from spotting them. Also, nature has provided chameleons with eyes that can swivel 180 degrees, so they could sort of see what's happening behind their heads. And these swiveling eyes can operate independently of each other. It's pretty amazing. Madagascar also has over 200 species of frog, including a very appealing one, this bright red, very aptly named tomato frog. And so I've left the prize exhibit in Madagascar's incredible menagerie, the lemur, for the finale of this lecture. And as I mentioned earlier, lemurs were displaced everywhere in the world by the more evolutionary advanced monkeys and apes and other primates, except where lemurs took refuge. And they might have rafted across the ocean from Africa on large clumps of vegetation, it's believed. They arrived in Madagascar and some smaller neighboring islands, and then they differentiated into a series of species, according to some Darwin evolution. The word lemur, by the way, is derived from the Latin word lemurtus. It means spirits of the night or ghosts, and indeed this likely refers to their large reflective eyes and also to the eerie wailing cries of some of the species. Sorting out these different species is challenging, but I will tell you some general information about them and then speak about a few of the more common species. Lemurs range in size from the pygmy mouse lemur, which I managed to get a little part image of here. It's just a few inches long. It's the world's smallest primate. It weighs only an ounce. The other end of the spectrum is the rare indri, who refused to show its face to me. It is about 3 feet tall and weighs some 22 pounds. Typically, the smaller lemurs are active at night, while the larger ones are active during the day, so they're not competing with each other. Unlike most other primates, lemur species have a matriarchal society, that is, females are dominant over males. Communication is by all sorts of smells and sounds. Smell is very important. Scents include chirps and barks and cries, which convey a wide range of information, such as who's in charge, who's related to whom, who lives where, who is fertile. Very important, and warning of dangers on the ground. And so lemurs, most of the species, spend almost their entire lives in the trees. Literally, they are surrounded by their diet, which consists of leaf and insect food. They do not travel very far. Their territories are small, and they basically rest most of the day because they are digesting their leafy diet, which is very heavy on carbohydrates. Lemurs typically live, for the most part, in family groups of 3 to 6 individuals. Interestingly, although groups of the same species cannot coexist in the same territory, different lemur species can live in the same area because they feed at different heights within the canopy of the forest. So again, this is nature's way of reducing competition and allowing them, some feed at the daytime, some feed at night, so they're not competing for the available food. Different lemur species, in addition, are dominant in different parts of Madagascar, some in the desert, some in the mountain or rainforest environment, where they're more environmentally suited. Although they are difficult to spot, and this was some of my most challenging effort to find and photograph lemurs in the wild. They're well camouflaged within their forest canopy, and again, they're sleeping most of the day. But some species, like the brown lemur, shown here, were, very few of them, but were friendly and curious and approached us at close range. Some of the most interesting ones were the ring-tailed lemurs, easily recognized by their banded tails. These were uniquely more lively and traveled in larger troops, sometimes as many as 20 animals, and they also tended to move along the ground rather than in the trees. And their long tails are used for communication as well as for balance when jumping from tree to tree. And with its black and white fur, yellow eyes, and extravagant ear tufts that merge with its cheek fur to form a kind of ruff around its neck. This is the ruffed lemur, quite attractive. Now, Madagascar's largest and most unique lemur is the large, another picture of the ruffed lemur, is the indri, shown here. It's the only lemur, in case you're ever asked this question, it's the only lemur species that does not have a tail. It's a trivia question. It's been described as looking like a 4-year-old child in a panda suit, and it is famous for its wailing cry, which sounds a little like something between a fire siren and the song of an operatic tenor. Injuries can leap horizontally up to 30 feet, and they're especially active for an hour around daybreak when it's easiest to see and hear them. Their sound can be heard for up to 2 kilometers through the forest. So, in conclusion, although it's classified as part of Africa, Madagascar has, as I think you've seen, a very different and distinct human history and culture than its mainland neighbors. And its most striking feature, though, is its natural history. Because the island has been isolated for millions of years and by hundreds of miles from the African mainland, it became a biodiverse laboratory, producing what is a magnificent menagerie of plants and animals. Most are unique to the island. Many have not actually been identified yet. One of the earliest European explorers described the island in the year 1630 as the chiefest paradise this day upon earth. Well, as it was in the 17th century, so it is today. While Madagascar is one of the poorest countries in the world, it does face the similar enormous economic and social challenges of other developing countries. It is, I found, exceedingly rich in the beauty and gentle friendliness of its people, in the scenery, in the food, and of course, in the amazing wildlife. Thank you very much. Anybody been there? Yes, let me, I don't know if, I still haven't figured out after all these years where the lights are for this room, but if somebody knows and can get, oh, yeah, could you get the lights? Great, I knew I'd, yes, sir. Yeah, the food was, zebu, of course, is their main meat, but otherwise it's a lot of rice and beans. Potatoes are grown, so that was the dominant food, although they do have a relationship with France now, so they do import ingredients and foods from France still, part of their economy. So in some of the towns, at least, not in the rural areas, but in the towns, you can find some French cuisine, French sauces, certainly morning baguettes are in the cafes that are there, because there is a French population that economically supports these foods. And then your other question was about the... Oh, the carnivores, no, there are none of the type that you will see in mainland Africa. There are no herds of the big 5 lions or giraffe, or none of that is located on Madagascar. They never were able to get there, essentially. Yeah.
At the beginning of that marvelous talk, you talked about the Europeans coming trading. What did Madagascar have to trade with them aside from vanilla?
They had some of the they had some of the crops that they were growing, so they traded some of their rice that they gave the Europeans. They also had some marble, sandalwood on the island, as I understand it, and that was traded with especially the Arabs going up the coast to Arabia, and the Europeans. And in addition to that, I think Madagascar was seen, particularly by the European powers, as a way station, because they were largely trading for the spices of Southeast Asia. And it was a long trip to go down the African continent and then make the turn into the Indian Ocean. And so they needed a place to establish a refueling station for their ships, for their a rest place, I should say, for their men and re-water. And so Madagascar became strategically very important in order to then continue their journey to Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Did they have any tribal conflicts there?
Yeah.
What kind of government do they
Well, right now they have a government that is largely based in the French system. So they have a president, prime minister. They have elections. There has been some corruption and there have been some problems. But by and large, other than some periods of instability, it's worked pretty well. So it is a functioning democracy, certainly relative to some of the other countries in Africa. And they have had largely a real absence of tribal conflict. So you have in places, well, many countries of the African mainland, Kenya and a bunch of places where there have been major conflicts and unraveling of the governments. But Madagascar has been able to avoid that, perhaps in part because of their French legacy, which trained them better. I find the colonies that were countries that were former French colonies seem to be better at self-government than those that were ruled by England, for example, or by Portugal, or by Spain, for that matter. And France seemed to be better prepared to take on independence when it was granted in 1960. Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm often asked about that. The education and the health system, of course, they're highly dependent on where you live. So in places in the cities, in the capital, Tana, as well as in the handful of other larger towns, there are formal schools and there are good hospitals and clinics. But as you get into the smaller outlying rural places, certainly some of the places I showed you that only have train access, do not really have schools, these live in dire poverty. So there is a wide range. I would say that my wife and I were in a small town. We rented bicycles. She fell on a rut from a bike, and she was attended to very professionally, I thought, by a local clinic in a town that might have had 10,000 people in it, 5,000 people. So there are clinics in the absence of hospitals. There are medical personnel in the absence of formally trained doctors who step in situations like that and are very well suited for handling things that might be otherwise beyond their scope or capability. Yeah.
How long did you spend there, and what kind of places did you stay?
Yeah, so I stayed, the question is how long did I stay there? I was there about 5 weeks, and I stayed, there are lodges and inns, because as I mentioned, there is a fair amount of tourism there, although it's not largely American tourism, because it's very hard to get to, but there is a lot of French tourism. French is widely spoken, so French people feel comfortable, and although I didn't travel in the French style, I still stayed in some of the lodgings that were there. There were small guest houses in the towns, and there were rural lodgings, which were simply appointed, but quite comfortable and clean. Some of them were in the national parks themselves that have been established. Okay, well, yes, one more question?
I didn't understand about vanilla. How do you make and process vanilla? Is it a bush or a plant?
It's a plant with it has a long stem. It's like a green bean, but it's very long, and you open it up and you take out you then boil it. You make it in whatever you're cooking with it. Yeah, or you can process it to a liquid, like if you buy vanilla extract. Yeah.
How did you get your friends?
What's that? Oh, it wasn't, I can still remember that. Just by sort of gently prodding it off, yeah. He did, he jumped on me, yeah. So, yeah, that was one of the friendlier lemurs. Yeah, it was cool. Thank you, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I like that picture. Thank you all very much. Thanks for coming. See you next time. Next time, by the way, I will be speaking about Greenland a couple of months, talking about what's going on there. Another fascinating island in a different way.